Hey there folks, good to have you back. David here with another video, and I am quite excited about this one. I reckon it is one of those encounters or models that can be used in an awful lot of game systems. Doesn't matter whether it's D&D and fantasy or modern day or futuristic. You'll see what I mean. So grab your handbags, we're off to the Far East. Let's look at some Terracotta Warriors. Roll the titles. Now, one thing I've said about your builds, obviously you should put some thought and planning into it. So here's a little bit of an insight into my fevered imagination. Gather round, story time. So I've had the idea for this on the back burner for a couple of years. A while back I ordered from Warlord Games one of their sort of mystery boxes, and you pay a certain amount of money and you get a load of different things pertaining to all of their game systems, some of which was really useful. The unit troops that I did were using sprues that were part of that box. I'll leave a link to that particular video just there. But there was a load of other stuff in there as well. There were some Doctor Who miniatures, which I am gradually getting through painted up. There was some other stuff which I traded off, but there was this particular one that caught my eye. Samurai Horsemen. And I looked at these and I thought, oh, they look absolutely gorgeous. Do I really need another army? And the truth is, no, that I don't. The wife would have killed us again. But they were something that I just didn't want to get rid of. But I really had to think of a reason to keep hold of them. And I thought about D&D. And yes, there's Oriental Adventures. Were we really going down that track? No, I could shoehorn it in. But that night that I opened it up, what happened to be on the TV but a movie called The Mummy 3. It's the old one with Brendan Fraser. Really enjoyed it. And instead of Egyptian mummies, he was off with, in China, dealing with basically a terracotta army. And that got me thinking back when I first started playing D&D. It was the red basic set, and we went through the basic set and we went through the expert set and the companion and got a couple of other associated play aids to go with it. And there was one, and I can't remember the name of it. If anyone can remember, please pop it down in the comments. It was like a monster manual, and in there, one that I can remember was a terracotta warrior, basically living statue. But I do remember that the picture was wrong because it was of a samurai warrior rather than Chinese. But then I thought, hang on a second, anything that's medieval and Far East, and you don't get more iconic realistically than samurai, they could be used in the same way that they did in that picture for terracotta warriors. But I only had a box of horsemen, so I placed an order and got these. So that is the basis for it. We're going to be using Warlord Games samurai miniatures. We're going to paint them up as terracotta warriors. We're going to put them in a little bit of a background base. It's an encounter. Are they going to come to life, or are they just decoration? Your players are going to find out. Now, I wouldn't normally stop at this stage. The interesting stuff happens once, you know, the ground cover is on and we've got an undercoat on there. However, because we are converting essentially a block of army miniatures into ones for individual skirmish, in this case, you know, primarily D&D in my case, there are a few small differences. Now, first things first. It did take a longer time than usual to get these assembled. Normally what I would do is I would sort of, you know, watch TV while I'm assembling miniatures and that kind of thing. Because they are skirmish rather than rank and file, I did have to double check for various different poses and double check to make sure that in the style of Terracotta Warriors, I didn't have any that were looking the same. They are all supposed to be very individual. So that took longer than expected. And the arm poses and things like that. Realistically, with these, and they are from the Pike and Shot range, supplied by Warlord Games but manufactured by the War Games factory. The legs and bodies and heads go together fine, but I always have problems getting the pose on the arms, and that just took a horrendous amount of time. The other thing is, and let me show you with this, these are the kind of bases that tend to come with rank and file troops, so that you can mount multiples on one base, but of course for skirmish we want them individually based. Not a problem for the infantry because I have plenty of spare bases for them, but the cavalry was a different kettle of fish, and as you can see I have had to just use some spare sheet styrene that I had and make more individual cavalry bases for them. So that took a little bit of time too. What else did I have a problem with? Right, okay, mounting the cavalry. As you can see, if I turn this one sideways, you've actually only got, in most cases, one leg touching the ground. So that doesn't make for a really good joint to mount your miniatures on. So what I had to do was use the super glue and baking soda trick, and I used some plasticine just to hold the miniature upright while everything's set, which is all good and it worked really well. They are nice and secure, but one little bit of prep that you shouldn't forget, as you can see on this one, I left this one specifically so I could show you it, that baking soda is very powdery, so just get a nice soft brush and make sure that you sort of finish off getting that excess off there, especially not so much of a problem on the ground cover, but do make sure that you get it off sort of like the bottom part of your miniature, because you don't want that hindering the base coat in any way, shape or form. These are now ready for some ground cover and then a base coat, but before I do that, because I am going to be using the same kind of material on these as I am on their display base, I'm going to do that stage all together. It's just going to be straight builder sand like this. That's going to go on all of the bases. So I will take these now over to the larger work area so that I can measure them all out for their display base. Apologies for the shadows on this one. It's a really bright winter's day outside and the sun's kind of low in the sky. However, hopefully you can see all this. What I have done is I have got them laid out in the way that I want on the display board. Now I'll quickly show you a picture of sort of like the Chinese terracotta warriors in their dig site, and what I'm going to do is try and recreate that a little bit. So to start with, I am going to have a raised area here and at the sides because they've been dug out. This front area is going to be clear. I'm probably going to put maybe, I don't know, some kind of tomb entrance or something like that just there, and we'll have it raised up at the back to the same height as the sort of sides and the middle part, and I'll probably put a backboard, possibly with a doorway in, just so that you can actually get into this area or exit and run away from it. So that is the idea. Now thankfully this is all nicely gridded, so I can put a couple of bits of tape to mark out the size of it, and I will get a piece of core flute cut out to the size that I want my display area to be. Okie dokes, core flute baseboard cut out. That's going to be round about the size of it, and I have already marked out the areas here for the sort of raised up bits. This is going to be flat, and down the front there, that is where I am going to have sort of like a tomb entrance, because terracotta warriors need a tomb to be able to guard. I have a number of polystyrene blocks, and basically I'm just going to cut them to shape and fill in this area. I'm going to keep the height round about the same because I have measured it up, and the tallest miniature, the spear, comes up to about there. So, you know, this is going to raise above the height of all of the soldiers that are going to be in the gaps here, to make it look as if they've been dug out. And yeah, then we've essentially got a walkway around the stuff that's been excavated. So I'll crack on and get that all cut out and stuck on. Right, so a couple of things. We've got these blocks all built up, joined together and all added. Now, I am going to be putting cover directly onto this core flute, so I do need to give that a bit of a rough up with, you know, wet and dry there. Otherwise the PVA is not going to stick. The next thing I am going to do is give the polystyrene on this my skin coat of tissue paper and really watered down PVA, because I do want to spray this rather than hand paint it. And then I think down here I'm going to do an old style entranceway, and then I've got to put a backboard on with a more modern entrance at the back. So that's what it's starting to look like. Then it's just going to be ground cover on there. So this is the backboard that I've got done, and as you can see I've got that tissue paper skin on top of it. It's all dried now, as is the stuff on the main base. But before I attach this, I just want a wee bit of detail, and all I'm going to do is put a bit of a frame inside that door. So grab some sandpaper to smooth down the edges, take a measurement, snip it off there. Yep, and I'll get that good in place. And then do the same with the sides. So that's all nicely set in place. And just while I'm here, let's flip this over. And these are just some old carpet tacks that are knocking around. And I'm just going to force that through. There you go, 6 of them like that, and that will help secure it into the, stab myself, yeah, watch out for that, they're sharp. That will help secure it to the polystyrene while the glue dries to connect that upright. Now while I'm here and I've got the tools out, I want a few accessories for this, and I'm going to do some planking just to go like across those trenches, just in case, you know, we're using it in modern times and it's an actual excavation site. And I've measured these and they are pretty much around about the right length, and 3 of them together gives enough width for a 25mm base to stand on. Right, and then all I do, get one of the thinner sticks, about that much, and then I'll join them together and I'll have a plank walkway. There, it's all assembled just like that. Okay, and that'll sit across, you know. There you go. I'll get the other one done. There you go, that's what I meant. Right, let's get this backing board attached. So I want some nice thick splots of PVA. I'll make sure I get some on the tacks as well. And I've also powered up the hot glue gun. So just on the edges and a bit up there, and then that should hold it in place while I do that, and just apply pressure to those nails in case they've slid out, because they are going to do the bulk of the holding just while everything sets. Marvellous! Well, that lot's all setting. It is time to do a bit of sculpting. So let's crack out the Sculpey. Tighten that up a bit. Get so got a nice flat. And I want something about that size. Trim that around the edges. And of course I can smooth it off with sandpaper once it comes out of the oven. Let's see if I can get this on here. Right, I think I've got that about right. And now I want another one, but this is going to be a ring of stones. So I'll get that flattened out like so. Straighten that inside edge. Do the outside edge. Definition on that one. Right, and that can go off to the oven. Okay, time to get some texture coat on this piece, and it is just going to be straight sand on the walls, and while it's a little bit of a pain in the bum, at least all of the sort of surfaces, as long as you rotate everything through 3 dimensions, you can get a nice flat area to be able to work on. Make sure I get it all the way up and around the detail. Then just the straight sand and get it sprinkled on. Make sure there's a good coating there. Then that can be left to dry, and then I'll rotate it and do the other sides. So I've got the sand coat on all of the base and all of the sort of like vertical surfaces. Final one, I'm switching up to builder sand for this, just on those kind of top raised areas to give it a little bit of a more definition, a little bit of variance, because it is going to be a dry brush when I come to paint this, and we want that to stand out just a little bit more, just to give that contrast. And once I've got all of this done, I will leave it to dry overnight, and it can go for a spray base coat tomorrow. So while the spray undercoat is drying on everything, and it's got to be said, I am really chuffed with the results, let us get on with the ornamentation. So we've got the entrance, we've got the cover for it, and we've got a gate over at one side. Now, I'm not going to make these out of stone. These, if I can get away with it, are going to be jade, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that on this one. And yeah, it's not particularly brilliant paint. The coverage isn't marvellous, but I am fine with that because I do want sort of a streak kind of marbled effect. Alright, now as you can see, I'm leaving some gaps in the undercoat. I'm not making these lines massively straight because we're going to put an ink wash over the top, and that is going to, you know, blend it all in. So that's the first coat, and I've made up a very watered down green ink wash, just with, again, with poster paint, and we'll get that on there because we want just a nice very thin colour. We want an awful lot of that white showing through, and the fact that I've made the mix up myself and there are some of those darker patches coming through is all good, because we're going to repeat this process 2 or 3 times, just working our way in. So that's kind of what the terrain piece is going to look like when it's finished. Really happy with the way it's all come out, and I think the spot colour just, you know, adds that little bit. Obviously there's lots of miniatures to go on there, but the one thing I am going to do is just give it a quick dry brush with some tan paint, just to kind of pick out those edges. Please excuse any rustling if you hear it in the background, it's just the cats playing. You've seen that happen in other videos. Right, where are we? We are at the final stages, and it is the last part of the figure painting, and I have a bit of a dilemma. Now, these have just had a base coat of Villaggio Beastie Brown, so spray paint, and I think it has come out absolutely brilliantly. So good, in fact, that I am wondering whether or not to actually leave them like that. Obviously, I do need to darken down with a darker brown wash the bases so that they fit in with the terrain a little bit better, but I am wondering whether or not I need to do anything else to the actual sort of statue itself, because I think that is round about exactly the right colour we're after. However, what I am going to do is use a test miniature, and I will paint it up the way that I had imagined that I was going to do the colour scheme, and if it turns out that, you know, comparing 2 together, just the base coat by itself looks best, then all I've got to do is respray one model. So I will take one all the way through to completion. First things first, Tamiya Dark Yellow, and I'm going to give this a dry brush all over. Right, okay, so that has very much already changed the profile of the model. Okay, next I'm going to go for a flesh wash just to knock that highlight back, and he's going to need a goodly amount of time to dry before I go for the final colour. Now that that ink coat is dry, this is a medium grey, and I'm just going to dry brush some of that over the highlights just to kind of bring out the dustiness that you get on the originals. Let's see how this works out. I'm just going to dry brush it a wee bit heavier up on the facial features, just to pick them out. And just a wee side-by-side comparison there in, you know, proper sunlight. And yes, I think I will actually go for the painted version. It just does give it a wee bit more depth. Right, I'll get these all painted up. So that's the finished product. I've ended up with a nice static display board for a bunch of my miniatures. I've got an encounter room for modern day stuff, you know, a nice archaeological site. Doesn't matter that there's statues there, they may or may not come to life. But of course we've got a nice big battle for one of my D&D games. Speaking of which, let's talk about some monster stats. Now, I'm going to leave some suggestions in the description down at the bottom of this video, so please check that out if you are a 2nd edition player. I am not going to be republishing anything that is copyrighted material, so you will need access to a copy of the Monster Manual and the Complete Fighters Guide. Now, go to page 171 of your Monster Manual, check out the entry for the Stone Guardian. I reckon that is the closest that we have to what these Terracotta Warriors should be. The hit dice are round about right for what I imagined them and from what I remember them from the basic D&D version. The special defences are good, I'm happy with those, but we are going to boost the XP value just a little bit by giving them a special ability, and that is where the Fighters Guide comes in. Now, these statues are caricatures of Emperor's Guard, elite soldiers in other words, which means they're not going to be dumb, they are going to use strategy and tactics. You've seen that an awful lot of them are armed with spears, therefore don't be afraid to fight with them 2 ranks deep to get those multiple attacks against your characters. Also, because they are trained soldiers, have a check in your Fighter's Guide, page 61, for the weapon and style specializations. Now these ones obviously are patterned on samurai rather than Chinese warriors, but whichever model you're using, chances are you're going to have a mix and match of weapons. And by my reckoning, if these were a fighter class, they would have at their hit dice 5 weapon slots to be able to use for weapons or specializations. So, just from the weapon mix that I've got on those models, 3 chances are going to be taken up with katana, wakizashi, and the 3rd weapon, whether or not it is a spear, naginata or daikyu, the longbow. You're also going to take up a slot in weapon specialisation. I would recommend going katana, because then at least you've got a nice meaty melee weapon and you can throw your spear first. But that's entirely up to you. You may want to go specialisation in one of the other weapons, especially that daikyu from horseback, so you've got some specialist archers there, or the naginata for those horsemen, or for 2nd rank fighters you may want to go specialisation in the spear. Then for your 5th slot, go for one of the style specializations. I would recommend going for 2 weapon style, because once you've thrown a spear, then you can go katana and wakizashi and get multiple attacks. Also check out the 2-hander style. You may want that if you've specialised in one of the polearm weapons, and it also gives those models that have only got the 2 swords available to them the option of using that katana 2-handed as well for a little bit of extra speed and a bit more damage. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this build. I certainly did. The terrain piece was a very easy build and one that you guys should be able to do with the kind of skills you've got. The soldier assembly was a little bit more of a mission, which is why this project took a little bit longer than I intended. However, from my point of view, it's a nice display piece. It's a board that I can use in a number of my games, and let's not forget the fact that that is a nice little block of figures off the pile of shame. This is a project that I've been planning for quite a while, and I'm glad I've got it under my belt. There is still more to come. Thank you so much for watching. Please, if you're new here, hit the like, subscribe button. There's more stuff coming. Some of it's going to be fun. I've got another epic build in the pipeline, which I am really excited about. It would be good to see you back again. Until then, ta-ra for now.